so small. You had people who were much older and people who were much younger, like starting in the late 70s, early 80s. And I first started going to shows when I was 13. Jem was probably, are you 2 years older than me, 15 or something like that?
Yeah, I got the fake ID. I got the fake ID so that on my 16th birthday, I jumped ahead a year and was able to start going to shows.
So I knew Ian because he was in bands and I was in bands, and he produced my band. And I often heard of Jem. Jem had gone off to college right about the point when the bands I was in were starting to play more and more shows. But it is a weird miracle that we hadn't met. And when we finally did meet, we had this. We worked on a film called Glue Man together, which was a song on our first record, but it had actually been originally a short film made by Jem. And he showed us the footage and suggested we collaborate somehow on making a piece of art together out of the film. And he had written some words loosely based on the film, and then I started putting in some words, and we developed this song out of it, and then we gave him some tracks, and he put it on the film, and that was the first time we collaborated. And then after that, we started eventually working on album covers together, and it became this process of, he was almost like our, kind of like our in-house aesthetician, artist, go-to person who kind of helped formulate a lot of the look of the records, a lot of the way we thought about things. And he was always showing us footage, he was always shooting us and showing us like kind of silent Super 8 of us playing. And we said, originally we had this idea of like, why don't we write some instrumentals to put on these short films? And then eventually it morphed into the movie that this became. It was a 10-year process for sure, maybe longer. But that was kind of the arc of it.
Yeah, it's funny, I often forget about that whole Glue Man thing, but it was really important in a lot of ways, because for me it was just at a time where I was sort of confronting the fact that most people who were dealing with sound and image as related to rock and roll were kind of getting the MTV template for that, and I was so disappointed and kind of furious about that being the way that people were getting, you know, sound and image outside of regular movies. And I just thought, wow, really? Like that's what it's going to be? And Glue Man was a real, like, it was an intentional struggle to sort of make an anti-music video. And so it was also very kind of powerful collaboration, because as soon as I heard the music, it was just super heavy to me, and I was really, you know, honored that some footage of mine was kind of part of the process. And then I remember sitting with Guy in a bedroom somewhere and recording him saying, a man's own head is his own town or something, and like, I don't know, we were like, wanted it to sound real, like, it was sort of all like, we didn't have any kind of concept of like, you know, plugins or effects or whatever, so it was just like recording it on some little recorder, and then, you know, anyway, it was just a really great process. And then through the 10 years of making Instrument, Glue Man was sort of, for me, the thing that, like, I didn't have initially a SingSound 16 camera. I'm kind of a weakling, and I could, you know, barely like hold one up for a whole show. So every once in a while, you know, I would, you know, realize that we needed to do some SingSound, and I would get, you know, kind of a halfway proper crew and real gear, and I'd have somebody else shooting some, and I'd maybe be off to the side with my Bolex. And then, like, in that Irving Plaza show, it's like Glue Man starts up, and I'm just like, you know, I just like go over to the cameraman. I'm like, you know, like take the camera off his shoulder. Like, I must film Glue Man. It's like a weird, like, everybody involved would kind of go into a trance, and I would have like the camera trance to kind of echo the Guy trance. So yeah. Anyway.
And you talk about collaboration between you guys, and this film is actually credited, I believe, to the Jem Cohen and Fugazi film. So I'm wondering how that worked, and was the band involved in the editing at all? Were there decisions like maybe Jim wanted some things in, or felt strongly about, or you did?
Yeah, definitely. We at the point we decided we were going to make a serious film, and we talked to Jem about, you know, we'll give you some money to like come around with us on the road and, you know, hire crews and shoot it. We didn't really know what we were doing except amassing material, you know. And at a certain point we had a colossal mountain of material. There's a cut of this.
Although not by today's standards or by documentary standards.
Yeah, that's true.
When we think of colossal, we're talking about, I don't know, maybe like 40, 50 hours of stuff. Then I remind myself that they made that Metallica movie with some 1,500 hours, and, you know, a band with a whole lot to say. But anyway, it's an interesting movie.
That's
but I think about that. I'm like, wow. All right.
But anyway, we have probably 2 or 3 more of these. This movie seems long. It could have been and was a lot longer. It was like 1.3 hours. We just kept cutting it, and still a little bit long. But there was a point where we decided we were going to just, you know, put an end cap on it and just start working on the editing. And I would make trips up to New York from DC. And I really do think that when you and I edited together, it was like a deepening of the friendship between the two of us, because it was intense and hard, and there were conversations about what should go in and what should go out. But for the most part, it was really fun. Like, yeah, it was really cool. We had this idea that Jem talks about of dub filmmaking, like trying to have edits that were musical and music that was edits, and, you know, it was like this kind of combination thing, like a different way to approach.
Yeah, I think we carried that whole, the principle that sort of started in Glue Man of, like, I hate to use an academic word when we're not academic at all, but it was a very deconstructive thing. It was like, you have a thing, and how can you, like, break it down and then recombine it? And the whole process of cutting was like that, but it was also difficult because we were always in, like, this was before the days where you had, like, Final Cut at home. So we were dependent on getting into some edit room where they had Avid, and often they would let us in, like, late at night when the commercial clients were done or whatever. So there were, like, I mean, there was one time where we ended up, I think, going the whole night, and then there was, like, a terrible, like, flash as the thing crashed at like 6 a.m. and we were, you know, we knew we had to be out by 8 a.m. or whatever, and so they were super intense, long edit sessions and we never had like you know, any kind of like full-time technician or anything. There was a guy, Davey Frankel, who came on and saved our asses now and again, and was really good to work with as well. But it was a really kind of organic process, and then often I didn't usually have the whole band in the room editing. Usually, like, somebody would come and we'd sit and edit, and then, like, the band member would go back to DC and, you know, like, show it to the other band members, and they'd hash some stuff out. So
I think the biggest kind of difficulty in making the film, or the biggest, I guess, controversy for us, was in the band we really did not want to, we didn't want there to be like access into certain aspects of our lives or the band. We wanted the film to speak for itself in a way that it could just observe us working, and we didn't want to have to like just deliver the goods in terms of answering certain questions. We just were really not into it. And eventually there's that scene where we're sitting at a table. We've been rehearsing and recording up in Connecticut, and Jem had set up a camera on the table and started asking us questions, and there was a lot of discussion about whether or not that should be in the film, or what explanations were necessary. We were just, as a band, had gotten into this thing where we were just really against the idea of guiding people to certain conclusions or using the movie as a marketing thing. Or, I mean, now when I think about, it's interesting like how much rock mythology is seductive and how much of it is really damaging for musicians and for the public at large. I'm a person who like grew up loving and worshiping the Beatles to a point that was like almost psychotic, but then as I got more involved in music and started playing, I started realizing how much bullshit is attached to the way we imbibe music and the way we produce music, and how confining it is and how stupid it is. And we wanted the film to talk about music as a community, or music as being born from context and people. It's not just about four men, you know, being heroic or something like that. It's about the people, and that's why there's one of the things that I love most about the film is the portraits of the people at the shows and talking to the people at the shows and letting it be honest.
Sorry, the band almost to a fault was actually a little bit antagonistic to me about, I mean, it took so long making a movie and so much footage and material, you know, went back and forth, and they were not, like, they were utterly fascinated about seeing the things that they don't normally see, or like hearing people say things that wouldn't be said to their face, but they were really not into self-promotion, and I think found it kind of nauseating to just like, oh God, we, you know, more, like here we are again, you know, and so I had to push a little bit to, you know, like, he is somebody that I interviewed who said something thoughtful and obviously cared about the band in a very sort of, you know, just in a really nice way. But there were times when I had like a number of super positive comments, and the band was just like, God, like, enough already. And so it was the absolute antithesis of like doing a gig for a commercial label where the whole intention is to sort of make more heroic a band and to like elevate the new record and convince everybody that, you know, there are so many times where like a band has a new record and you just hear them saying like, well, we just really wanted to take it to another level, you know, we were going to push the envelope this time, and it's just like, okay, but I did have to, you know, sort of, there was a sort of a little bit of a tug of war to not have it sort of excising positive things just because the band didn't want to be patting themselves on the back.
But the dichotomy, I think, is honest in the film, because as a function of we had a low door price of $5. As a function of that, our shows were very evenly divided between people who really loved the group, followed the group, and people who had $5 and nothing to do. And some people who came who actively did not like the group but wanted to engage with us or whatever. And that was the kind of the point of that. It wasn't, the low door price was to make the show an open event, so that it wasn't just about, it was about a lot of things. It was about communicating, but it was also about confrontation and all that kind of stuff. So it just was we tried to make it as much of an open door as we could, and that's what's in the film.
Yeah, like, and there's a woman in the Knoxville parking lot who just says like, I forget what I asked her, the woman in the purple T-shirt, who just says, well, you know, I don't know, they're just a band, like any other band. She's not negative about it, but I remember the band. It was one of those things. It's just like it's a, as an editor, it's one of those things. It's like it's sort of neither here nor there. It's just probably, you know, a cutting room floor moment. And the band was like right on. Like what a great thing.
I really hope people don't think we were making fun of anybody in the film, because I think she's totally right on. Why should she love the group? What is there to know or love? She doesn't. She's checking it out, and that's honest. I mean, I went to plenty of shows like without, you know, you don't have to like be a total scholar of the thing to be there. That was the point. Like we're glad she was in the room.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that is some of the more memorable scenes. The not just the interviews, but just also when you go down the line to photograph these people. I feel like the way you sort of frame it, and there's almost this really respectful, dignified portraits of sort of, if not a subculture, at least a certain type of, you know, American kid at that time in history.
it's funny actually. I have to be here in Knoxville. I'm actually talk a little bit about Knoxville because it is kind of like one of the thorniest sections of the film. And I think one thing in a way that people don't realize, is that like the Knoxville thing for some reason that night, like top to bottom, was sort of extreme. And we were at the Electric Ballroom, and I remember when the band was loading in, and there was sort of like I remember it's kind of a concrete stage, and there was this like dark area, and someone announced that a metal band called Ancient,
it was
Ancient, yeah, had burned a Bible on that spot. And I was like, and we've always thought that like, okay, that, now we know what Knoxville was, kind of a heavy night. But there was like, a kid appears with a trumpet who just asks if he can sit in with the band on trumpet. And then there's this like burnt spot, and then there's this like deep madness during the show of certain kinds of confrontations, and Ian carts the kid off, and guys are there's a couple, at the end of the show there were a couple guys spitting at me like like fucking cameraman. But to us,
that trumpet kid, I gotta say, that trumpet kid was awesome. He showed up and he was like, I really have this line I figured out for the song. It's like, I've really been working on it. We're like, awesome. And he gets up there and we're like, has he ever played the trumpet before? It's so fucking crazy. He's like, what?
But, so, like, the thing is, what to some people is this like dark kind of, apocalyptic Knoxville part of the movie. To us, it was like, it was a lot of things. It was hilarious. And it's like a certain kind of madness that we really like. Some of it is awful and some of it is hilarious and some of it, but I don't know, to me to this day it's kind of like, it's like a low budget epic that I never intended to be like to paint a particular picture of Knoxville as the toughest, heaviest town. But
that certainly wasn't the craziest night we ever had.
No, and like also it was a very interesting music night. I've talked to Ian about like favorite musical moments, and that he's doing like a whistling thing at that Knoxville show with his amp that he says is like one of his favorite documentations of his music making is this sound that he got. And so even when there was all this chaos, like it wasn't like bad blood and
No, I look at that footage, all I feel like is I miss that whole situation profoundly. I miss it horribly badly. I'd pay anything to be back in that room right now. I loved it. Fucking loved it.
So this was shot between 20 and 30 years ago, which in some ways does not seem that long ago, but watching it, you see like you guys playing on the White House lawn. Well, I don't know if it was a lawn, but the fact that you were able to set up and play that close is just incredible. That could never happen.
It's done. After 9/11, they basically barricaded the whole street. That show is, the story of that show is quite incredible. We had the permit. At the time, you could get a permit to play in any public park in D.C. So the show in front of the Washington Monument was the Sylvan Theater. That's a public national, Park Service stage that you can get. So we got that one, and then the Lafayette Square one, right directly across the street from the White House. The plan was for it to be a benefit for CCNV, which worked with homeless people in Washington, and we wanted to do it in the wintertime when those people are in the streets and are in danger. And it just so happened that as we'd gotten the permit like 6 months before, but once January, February, whenever it rolled around, there was the line in the sand drawn by George H.W. Bush for the first war in Iraq, and we realized that we had to combine the show with agitation against that event. And that to me is probably one of the high points of the group, that we were able to be there directly in front of that thing. We're in a position now politically where it can be very hard to feel like you have a voice or you know what to do. We didn't stop the war, obviously, but there there's a real problem now when people don't have access to public spaces or people don't have access to protest. There's laws being passed all around the country. We're trying to limit people's ability to protest. It's really, it's a very serious thing.
Yeah, along with that, aside from like the DC thing, I'm wondering when you guys watch this stuff back, what you feel is like maybe unique about that time in history, both as a performer, as an independent musician, and as a filmmaker. Like what is unique to American history and how things are different now?
I mean, I guess part of the sort of, one of the benefits of working on a movie over 10 years is that you get a kind of feeling of sort of national or global passage. It becomes sort of like literally a broader image of things. And so as the film developed, I remember kind of feeling like, for me, part of that, one of the really important things about the film had to be literally like the landscape, and seeing, traveling across country. I didn't tour endlessly with the band, but for, occasionally a couple of weeks, like going to places I had never been before and seeing this, creeping shopping mallification, corporate sort of takeover. That was increasingly weighing on me, but I think now, like you had no idea what was coming. Like you thought it was full on. Then, like I get a big kick out of, there's a shot of a McDonald's sign that's like has like a black shroud on it, and I remember it was the kind of thing that we didn't stop. It was just like a Super 8 camera, and I pointed it out of the window while we were rolling by on the way to a gig. But to me, it was like kind of like an epic image of something in the landscape that was being marked in a certain way. And to some degree, it's that times 10 or 1,000 now. So I feel that that's one of the things that's interesting to me about the movie. And when Guy talks in the movie about sort of, you could change in the industry, in a way, he's talking about the same thing. He's talking about a human landscape in which a corporate takeover has happened that is very different from the early days when the industry as a whole just had no interest. I mean, the DC punk scene was born out of a possibility created in part by the fact that you didn't really have to worry about selling out because it wasn't in the air at all. It wasn't even an option. So people were just operating. They couldn't have that as their intention because it wasn't even a consideration. And then, now, as we looked towards later period that's reflected in the movie, that had shifted massively, and in part with like just the giant success of certain bands, and the fact that corporations descended on local scenes with a kind of intensity that had previously been unimaginable. And it does warp things because people immediately start seeing the possibility of success as a goal. And so this movie, in a way, kind of charts that change, which for me is very much echoed in my thinking about filmmaking and the film business, because I had a very interesting template of a music scene that of course functioned outside of the industry, because there was no industry. And if you wanted to get to the industry in the same way in music and film, like some people are like, well, you have to go to LA or you have to go to New York if you want to be a filmmaker, which is rubbish. It's nonsense. But it's the same sort of lie that's told in both situations. So it was very useful for me to have an example, a template that came out of my high school experience, and then in particular my relationship with this band that, that said that's a lie. And it was also like a joy to have a band that even cared about that in terms of the movies, and because Cassavetes was absolutely pivotal for me as a filmmaker, and Guy wrote this song that I loved so much, specifically about that, and so there was I'm getting off topic a little bit, but all of those things were sort of in the bigger picture.
I guess, should we get questions from folks?
Anybody in the audience have a question?
Getting back to the way the audience is shown in the film, like I love the way that it captures the fact that Fugazi was kind of unique in respect that you reached an audience that was beyond this kind of rarefied space of us, right? Like us right here, like you reached so many more people, and you always did that with like dignity and openness and compassion. I think it sort of captures that. That said, I fucking hate Man on the Street footage. Like we should, like we're more and more we're speaking in sound bites or something, or some kind of.
About women on the street.
Right. Yeah, right. Well, that's part of the reason, right, why I hate Man on the Street. But like we're speaking in this like kind of commodified sort of soundbite form, and I wonder, looking back on that, is there any way that you might do that differently in terms of how you present Fugazi's audience and the relationship to the audience? Because it's really compassionate, but it's also kind of terrifying, Or are there any other filmmakers who do like music documentation or anything that kind of now or before then that you would think is another kind of model or something like that?
Wow. Well, first of all, I should say, I mean, one thing about like models is very early on in the process, like about the time that we sort of agreed that we were conceivably making a movie together, I was down in DC, and it came up like, well, should we watch rock documentaries and sort of like find some things to discuss, and almost immediately there was like a consensus, let's just not do that. What we did, however, that said, it was a pretty regular occurrence that if somebody had some great footage that we might all end up watching it together. So we particularly watched some Otis Redding footage that was very primitive in terms of it being like, it was really just a bare bones document of an amazing performance, and it was really inspiring to me in the sense of like the idea that sometimes you don't need to bring like concept and style and kind of flashy approach. That like sometimes the thing to do is almost scientific, is to witness something and let that happen. In terms of the making of the movie and what you asked about the interviews, I mean, one thing is it's a little bit humiliating for me to see like the tragic level of like technical inefficiency. Like at the time I was shooting silent Super 8 in my life for the first 3 to 5 years that this project was on. I didn't have a video camera. I was like, suddenly I was like, okay, you're going on tour with the band, oh my God, like you better borrow one of these handycam things. And it looks terrible. The sound quality is really poor. There were a few situations where we got together like a real crew at at the Irving Plaza show or the Roseland show. But part of the agreement with the band was, you can make this movie or we can make a movie together, but they didn't want any hassle from it. They were like, you can be on stage, but you can, but don't get in the way, and to a remarkable degree, they did their business, which was making the music, and just left me alone, and really ignored me to a degree that is an incredible gift for a documentary maker. But that doesn't mean that I knew what I was doing. So particularly with those interviews, I felt that something fascinating was going on, because I would be outside of the venue, like getting my gear together, and the band was sound checking, and they were not always fully able to kind of witness the scenes, and I really, began to hunger for, among other things, like just the regional character of the voice in different places was so extraordinary to me. I mean, to this day, I just love hearing the accent of one of the kids at the Knoxville show. I don't even know exactly what it is. It's just so cool to me that he actually has like a wildly specific regional thing going on in the way he talked. So that's the kind of thing that I was interested in, and I to this day, I just wish that I had better gear and knew what I was doing. So I was far from being able to like formulate an interesting approach to that whole question. That said, I also, came from a belief in filmmaking that really says, if you're there and you are there with the camera and you're lucky enough to have a camera and you turn it on, interesting things are just going to happen. So I didn't have to like think about it that much or instigate that much. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's and as I said before, going into it from the start with a notion that we didn't want to do whatever the sort of most normal thing was, which was generally like some kind of promotional vehicle, I knew that was not the project.
Yeah, that's great, and I see in the movie that you screened yesterday, I mean, it's not that you're not still taking footage of people in their everyday lives on the street, right? But it's not that interview style.
No, the newest film, which is playing here, World Without End, can't remember what day it's playing, that's a step into some very extended interviews, which is unusual for me. And that's also a movie, Museum Hours is kind of, in a way, a bigger project with, for me is a big crew, which means 6 or 7 people. World Without End is no crew. It's the last thing I did, and it's no crew, and it's very spare and humble, but it does have extended interviews, which maybe you want to check out. Before I forget, I also want to say tonight there's a project called Gravity Hill Sound and Image. We did one last night, but we have a totally different one that we're going to try to pull off in the parking lot. That's right. I can't remember exactly where it is, but it's right on this street. It's the parking lot that's kind of down. So Guy and 7 other very interesting musicians are going to be playing to projected images, and all the images tonight are sourced in 16 millimeter and double projection. And I welcome you to come check it out. It will be wildly varied as different people step up and play. And
World Without End will be showing back here at 6:15 this evening.
Oh, this evening. Yeah, that's right. I should have. All right. Anyway, any other questions?
For Guy?
Yeah.
Why did the band go on hiatus when you did?
Why did the band go on hiatus when it did? I don't think any of us know, and I still don't know, really. We had been together for 18 years, and maybe even 20 years if you count Ian and Joe kind of working together before the band kind of officially coalesced. Probably, that's what I say, probably about 20 years. And before that, Brendan and I had been in 4 or 5 bands together, and Ian had been in bands. We'd all been playing since we were very, very young. We reached a point in the end of 2002 where it was just a sequence of very difficult personal stuff happened. Parents started to die. People were having a bunch of stuff happen in all their lives, and we reached some kind of internal crisis. The band had been the number one kind of, basically the way we treated the group was like, when there's work to be done, we go out and we just put everything aside and we go and tour for 6 months out of the year, and we just work, we make records, we kept a very, very serious pace. And then we got knocked off our pace. And it's kind of like you've been on a train that's going very, very fast, and you fall off the train, and it's very, very hard to figure out how to get back on the train. I think the way we think about the band, it's hard for us to think about doing work that's not 100% full on. If we can't tour the way that we want to, if we can't work the way that we want to, we have never been able to conceive of a way to do it differently. I think everyone in the group feels weird about not being a band sometimes. We still consider ourselves a band. We still get together. I'm the only person who no longer lives in DC, but for a long time Joe lived overseas, and it was very rare that the four of us were in the same place at the same time. Now we see each other pretty frequently. I don't think there's ever been a week that goes by where I'm not in touch with Ian or Brendan or Joe or one of them. But it's perplexing. I don't think any of us really understand what happened. You know, there was no horrible fight. There was no, I mean, there was tensions and there was weirdness, but there was tensions and weirdness from the first day we ever got together. So, I can't really answer your question because I don't know. I think the idea that the band would do something again has always been something that no one has said that they would never work. We never ever had a discussion like this shit is over or we're not going to do this. Everybody's working. Ian and Joe have a new band with Ian's wife. They're working on music. Brendan has always continued to work on music. I've worked on music. I produce people. I work with Jem. Everybody does stuff, you know. But so I don't know. That's all I can say about that.
Any other questions?
Well, it seems like a nerdy question, you know, initially, but I think it maybe speaks to a bigger condition. You guys never really used effects pedals or anything, and a lot of like over the years I've started to think of like rock music sort of addressing like class issues and stuff, and I'm thinking about it like a 13, 14-year-old kid coming up now, like wanting to play guitar, and he thinks he has to buy a bunch of shit, you know, like he has to have like a bunch of pedals, he has to like, you know, get a bunch of recording gear, he has to, you know, record himself, put himself on YouTube, whatever. And I've always wondered how much of a conscious decision that was to just sort of keep like a really, you know, a minimal setup, you know, and wrangle as much sounds out as you could out of like really raw materials. If that was like, or you just didn't like any pedals that you ever heard.
I think for Ian, it was a very, very deliberate decision to never, never, never use a pedal. His take on it was, I have this guitar, and I'm plugging it into this amp, and all the sounds I'm going to make are the product of that combination. And it was, and he makes a good point that when you limit the options that you're working with, you actually open up a huge expanse of freedom to find things, and you're not, pedals can dictate you in a way, and a lot of that stuff can like kind of channel you down things. So he had a very, very strict ethic about it. For us, it was really weird. Like, I didn't start playing guitar in the group. I'd always been a guitar player. The band kind of formed. I was in this weird state. I'd left town, and Brendan had kind of joined the early version of Fugazi, and I came back and watched him practice, and I was very sad because I was like, I don't know how to play guitar with this music. I can't hear a space for the way I play, and I was very frustrated. So I started just singing in the group for a couple of years before I started playing guitar again. And I found like a way to play within this kind of wall of rhythm. But I did find I actually had to use a MXR distortion box. Just if I played single notes against Ian's and Joe's massive wall of rhythm, I needed something to just be clear. So I actually used a pedal, just as a booster to make the notes loud. So I never was like rigid in that sense, and I use some pedals now. But even now using pedals, there is this, I'm a person, I should really not have anything around me because I'm going to break it or I'm going to trip on it or some shit's going to happen. So I find it very frustrating to have to like dance with my toes on these fucking things. I don't particularly love them, but I do find them useful for certain things. So, but I take your point. But kind of a larger point is like is just like there's all these barriers to entry to being creative, and a lot of that is in your head. This feeling of like, how am I going to find a way to express myself? And you look to other models to find ways to do things, and if the one thing I hope the band is like offers a perspective on is just finding a different road, or finding a genre and then just breaking the genre and removing something from the middle of it and shedding the rest, or just finding other passages to do things, because you make mistakes and you look stupid, but you find ways that are true to what you find the tools that you need to be true to yourself, or whatever, and so it's a real process, but I hope that's what the band suggested.
Yeah, if I can just say one thing about this sort of the pedal notion. I mean, one of the reasons that I was happy to work on the film was because there were clearly a set of sort of mythologies developing, or that had developed around Fugazi, that to anybody who really knew them well were patently absurd. Like, they were considered to be this incredibly pretentious, self-serious band to some people, and that was, to me, just nonsense. And there's a scene in the movie where, like, I can't hold the camera still because I'm cracking up so hard, and I just thought that they were sort of the funnier people I knew. But anyway, so one of the other mythologies is that that sometimes, like, it's totally legit, Ian's concept about guitar. Like, I love that. I think that's a very beautiful thing. When I think of the filmmaking and I think about pedals, it's like a lot of times people assume that I'm like a purist filmmaker because I have clear, like, disdain for Hollywood narrative to a large degree or whatever. That doesn't apply to classical Hollywood narrative. Thank you, because I'm a massive, John Ford, Hitchcock fan or whatever, but I don't have a lot of respect for most big budget Hollywood narrative these days. That's true. But I look at the movie and I'm like, I love that first scene. It's Super 8 and it's tinted gold. Well, it's a pedal. I mean, I passed the Super 8 film through a pedal to color it gold. I never liked, like, video effects. Like, sometimes you'd see bands, like, passing their footage through a million different pedals and doing all kinds of jazzy, groovy, slick things, and that really turned me off. But to this day, I just love the gold. Like, to me, it's very satisfying. The band, if this is the very opening footage, and it's like super foggy, and every once in a while, like, the band, somebody just kind of like disappears into the light. That is not a pedal. That is the heat in the room and the condensation on the lens creating a kind of natural fog filter. And I love that I didn't, like, think about a look and put a fog filter on to create that. So on one hand, there's a pedal. On the other hand, there's no pedal. None of us are really purists, including Ian MacKaye. And one of the things that is, like, we're driving in the band, and we're listening to Morrissey, and we're listening to the Beastie Boys, and we're listening to, it could just as well have been Nina Simone or whatever. And whatever notion that people have about, like, this is this band and this is what they do and this is what they believe, a lot of that is nonsense. Some things, like a general degree of decency and thoughtfulness in how you run your operation, and those are not mythologies. That was actually quite true and legitimate throughout the whole run of that band, and continues in the way that that they operate as individuals. So I just wanted to make that point that there are aspects of a kind of simplicity that are very valuable, and then there are certain notions of, like, a kind of total purity that are less interesting to us, I think. And are we? Is it about? We're going to go see White Magic.
But yeah, you guys need to go on
and I hope you all go see White Magic, because Mira Balad is really extraordinary, and they are followed immediately by Zaloris White. Mira from 1 to 2 at the Square Room right around the corner. Zaloris White is at the Standard, I think. And Guy's been working a lot. George Zaloris is a master lute player from Crete. Jim is a master drummer from Australia and the Dirty Three. And they're playing from 2 to 3. Later tonight, Jessica Moss is playing solo. Guy has also recorded her. She's a dear friend. She's extraordinary, has an amazing record coming out. So those are 3 musicians that I have to recommend. And then, we do have our little gig, which could be quite a mess, but it'll be an interesting mess. What's that? Our show is, it's 10:30, I believe, in the parking lot, and run a little over an hour. So thank you all so much. And one last thing. Paul and the rest of this film team here are really doing an extraordinary job. It's really cool that the Regal is, they got the Smurfs 4 over there, and they've got this over here. That's great to have both things possible. And so thanks to that, the film group, thanks to Big Ears, Paul and company are involved in some very interesting local film stuff. For those of you who are film people, talk to them. And and our interviewer today works at the local archive, which is actually another great resource for moving image and sound stuff. So talk to him about what you got here in this town. And thanks to Big Ears.